Not too long ago, I reviewed the original Mega Man X, and now it's time to get into and discuss the sequel, Mega Man X2, released just a year from the original. The first Mega Man X title is praised as one of the most beloved 2D platformers, which overshadows Mega Man X2 in popularity, selling less than the original's 1.16 million copies. Even today, a Super Nintendo copy is a lot more expensive to purchase online, thanks to its exclusive CX4 graphics chip that was only used for this game and the Super Nintendo version of X3. Thankfully now it's available for the X Legacy collection, which is way cheaper. So, how is Mega Man X2? And is it as good as its predecessor? Let's find out. The story begins 6 months after Sigma's defeat from the first game. The Maverick Hunters are raiding a Maverick base, which are mass-producing mechanicoids. Afterwards, we see the brains of the operation, the X-Hunters, who are analysing X's abilities and resurrecting Sigma, while sending out 8 Mavericks to distract our hero. As X defeats 2 of the 8 Mavericks, the Hunters become worried that their troops won't be enough to stop him, so they decide to bargain and challenge X in a one-on-one fight in exchange for Zero's body parts, who sacrificed himself in the first game. Compared to the first game, where most of the story was in the game's manual, Mega Man X's 2 story is easier to digest thanks to more cutscenes telling you what is happening in the moment. Unlike Sigma, who only appears at the end, and Vile, who only appears twice in the original, the X-Hunters are more involved as villains, who appear throughout the story, and I do think it's cool that you can fight the villains in the fortress stages instead of just fighting some random bosses like the first game. The subplot of Zero's body I feel makes the story more personal towards our main character, since he has a chance to bring his body back to life. The X-Hunters and searching for Zero's body parts is what makes X2 different from X1. When you defeat 2 of the 8 Mavericks, the X-Hunters will come into action and scatter across the remaining stages. The X-Hunters sound interesting in theory and in replay value, but there are some issues with this feature. From what I can tell in my multiple playthroughs of the game, I'm not sure if they had a specific order or they just teleported to any random stage, but I felt it can distract you if you were going for a boss weakness playthrough. While it's hard to judge which stage they would teleport to, they have their own unique room in each stage. The rooms themselves aren't hard to find, but there are a couple of cases where you can't access these rooms if you don't have the correct power or armor part. If you only have 2 Mavericks remaining and don't have a single Zero part, then you won't be able to get them all, yachting you out of one of the outcomes. The fights against them are alright for the most part. Now, Agile can be easily defeated if you get him into a pattern of repeating the same air slash attack, and Ryan's ball and chain attack can be difficult to read. If you beat an X-Hunter, then you gain a Zero body part. The main issue I have with getting Zero's body part is that no matter if you fight the X-Hunters or not, the outcome of the finale barely changes. If you get all of Zero's parts, then you bring back your red comrade from the grave. But if you don't, then it doesn't really matter as the bad guys bring him back for you. You just have to knock some sense into your body in a boss fight. The actual ending is the same no matter what you do. It's not a big issue, but I feel less inclined fighting the X-Hunters in the future. The former writer and producer of the Mega Man X series, Kenji Inafune, really liked Zero, so he insisted the staff should bring him back for the sequel. I think that Hunters should have been available in all 8 stages, no matter which of the 2 Mavericks he defeated, but let the player explore to find their unique rooms without worrying about boss orders and the Hunters' random patterns. I think making the outcome have a huge impact, depending if you found the parts or not, would help too. Like, if you don't go out your way to explore, then Zero will remain dead. It would give the sense for the player to go the extra mile while rewarding them with an emotional scene. Maybe at least give X a new ability or a new stage to go through if the X-Hunters are defeated. before the fortress stages. Besides that, the core gameplay is similar to X1, so if you're going from that game to this one, it would be a smooth transition. You still get new powers from defeating the 8 bosses and gain new armor parts. The selection of Maverick fights were mostly enjoyable, with each of them being defeatable without using their weakness. In fact, there were times where I found the Buster to be more useful than the weakness weapons themselves. Like, if you use Will Gator's weakness, the Strike Chain, he will reset his pattern and dive into that bloody pool, making you wait till he comes back up. Some of the Mavericks even have a second phase during the boss fights, like Moth, who starts out in a cocoon, throwing junk at you, but then emerges into a moth halfway through with a new set of attacks. I would say some bosses like Will Gator and Crystal Snail do take a while to fight, since they have moves that slow down the pace. Snail even charges the frame rate a bit with its slow down ability that has a wave effect in the foreground. Thankfully, this time around, the Dasus are available from the start, instead of being unlocked, so you don't have to worry much about boss orders, unlike the next one. Instead, the armor parts have new functions. The suit upgrade now allows Mega Man to dash in midair, which is pretty cool, and isn't mandatory if you just want to play a standard run. The torso armor cuts the damage by half, like in the original, but has a new ability called the Digger Crush attack, a screen nuke that kills all minor enemies on the screen. It can only be refilled by getting hit by enemies, and besides one boss, I barely used it. Still, it's a nice addition to the torso upgrade. The headpiece now stands for seated areas, which is useful for first timers. The downside is that the stander is not automatic, meaning you would have to know where to stand, plus you cannot attack while you stand, making you totally defenseless. It would have been so much useful if the stand was automatic, making a beeping sound where you found a secret location while still being able to attack. Still, compared to the headpiece in X1, that doesn't get much action, X2's headpiece was reliable around the time when internet access wasn't as common compared to today. The best upgrade now is the armor upgrade, which now lets Mega Man store an automatic second charge slot if you fully charge your first attack. This makes good work against the majority of the enemies and the bosses. In fact, it's a bit too good, as it overshadows a lot of the new power-ups. Some of the new powers are useful, like the Speed Burner, which grants Mega Man a new air dash attack, and the Bubble Splash, which becomes one of the best sealed weapons in the entire series. But there are some that I only use for situational purposes, like Crystal Snail's Crystal Hunters, that turns enemies into platforms. We also have another Street Fighter move, which is Ken's signature move, the Soryuken, which has the same command motions from its origin series. The Soryuken does loads of damage, but unlike the Hadouken, it doesn't immediately kill the bosses and leaves you wide open after the attack. It's also only available in the third fortress stage, near the very end, where you can only use it in the last 3 stages, one of them being the traditional boring Mega Man boss rush, and the other being the final boss. The way to get it is very challenging, but at least you don't have to kill yourself numerous times. The Soryuken is cool, but it's not something I would go after in future runs. If you could have gotten it a little bit earlier, it would have been so much cooler. I really enjoyed the other design in X1, easing classic fans into the 16-bit generation. So with X2, the designers had the chance to expand on the other designs and Mega Man's arsenal without worrying much of staring players, since most people would have probably played the first game first. The levels are designed much more with the dash and war capability in mind, as the game expects you to learn and master them throughout your journey, especially if you want to find the collectibles. The collectibles aren't hard to find for the most part, if you go out your way exploring, but there are 1 or 2 instances where the collectibles can be a bit too hidden. For example, in Moth stage, you need to use Will Gator's weapon on a specific floor, that it's similar to any normal floor, to get an armor upgrade, and without using a helmet or a guide, then you will probably have no idea where to look. I had to admit I did get up a guide to find an armor piece in my first ever playthrough. There are some cool novel designs, like in Wire Sponges stage, where the weather changes from rain to a heat wave that affects the enemies and Mega Man. Overdrive Ostrich's stage introduces the first ever bike section in the X series, which is fun, though the controls need some adjustments, as the turns feel a bit sluggish. The level themes are diverse, ranging from a scorching desert, an erupting volcano, and a lovely crystal cave, and the effects are much more noticeable given some of these stages' life, like the sandstorm in the desert stage and the weather effects in Wire Sponges stage. The CX4 chip was one of the selling points for this game, which was used for mapping and transforming the wireframes seen in the Tiger Stream and 2 bosses. It was one of the reasons why the game was, and still is, expensive. Around the 90s, many developers were testing out 3D technology, and when Mega Man X2 came out in Japan, the PlayStation was already out. But still, the wireframe effects probably blew somebody's mind back in the day. I would say out of any IP Capcom had around the time, it did suit Mega Man the best, with its science fiction theme. It probably won't impress anyone today now. I know X1's many composers, only Yuki Iwai, who did Steel Penguin's theme, returned, and well, there are some good tracks like Crystal Snails, Bubble Crab stage, as well as the first Fortress stage, but I feel some of them feel too short and repetitive, like Will Data's stage. It's a shame because her work on many arcade Capcom fighters are great. Some people expect big changes to a sequel, and that isn't always the case. I do think it's a shame that X2 doesn't get much praise compared to the original, but I guess some people aren't usually excited the second time around. I'm not sure which Mega Man X game I prefer out of the two, but Mega Man X2 is still an amazing game. I prefer the way the story is told here, and the Maverick fights I think are better here too, but going after the X Hunters to TX0's parts, I found to be disappointing, without much reason to go after them, and I do slightly miss the other changes that happened in X1. If you enjoy Mega Man X, then I think you would most likely enjoy Mega Man X2, but if you decide to play it, please get it on the X-Legacy TXN, or the TXN on the 6th generation consoles if you're American, as the original copy is damn expensive. If you played Mega Man X2, let me know what you think of the game, and I hope you stick around because the next Mega Man game I will be tackling is Mega Man X3. I hope you have a wonderful day.